Today we're going to talk about CPCTC again. We talked about that in our very first lesson of this unit. Who can remind me what it stands for?
Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent.
Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So, today in our proofs, we are not going to be asked to prove that we have congruent triangles. We will need to do that, but we are actually going to be asked to prove that certain parts of the triangles are congruent. So because we know that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, what we are going to do is find a triangle congruency and then say I should be able to match up parts and pieces of those triangles together. So we will have two main steps that we're going to take in our proof. That doesn't mean our proofs are going to be 2 steps. These are like our 2 goals in our proof. We must first prove that 2 triangles are congruent. You cannot say CPCTC, corresponding parts of congruent triangles, are congruent if you don't have congruent triangles. Okay? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles, so we have to get ourselves congruent triangles, which is what we've been doing so far up to this point. But then what we're going to do is take it beyond that and prove what's actually asked for. So in our problems today, the proof is not going to be congruent triangles. But we will have to do that before we can do what they're asking us to prove. So these proofs are going to be possibly a step or 2 longer than they have been in the past. So most of our proofs up to this point have been 3 to 4 steps. So today we're going to expect our proofs to be a little bit longer than that. I don't know why it's always during this class that Doceri decides to stop working.
Maybe because they're recording.
Yeah, like it knows it. It doesn't like it. Okay, so we're going to begin the same way with our given. And I'm going to mark my picture according to that given. So A, B, and C, D are congruent, and angle 1 and angle 4 are congruent. Even though our proof is not congruent triangles, that is still our first goal, is to get some congruent triangles. In those triangles, we currently only have 2 things marked. We need 3 things before we can say we have congruent triangles.
AC is congruent to CA.
AC is congruent to CA. How do you know the letters are supposed to be like that?
Because it's not a reflection.
Because it's not a reflection. It's not a folding problem. I would have to turn these around to make them fit together. Our reason is still reflexive, but the letters have to be backwards because I would have to turn that top triangle around to make it fit on top of the bottom one. So we can add that marking to the picture. So we've got 3 things marked in the triangles now, which means that we can say triangles are congruent. Now we have not had to worry about our triangle names since our very first lesson on this. So now we need to remember that in that lesson we learned that the order of the letters is very important. We can name our first triangle whatever we want. So I'm going to name the bottom one alphabetically ABC. But then the way that I name the top one is dependent on how we name the bottom one. We need to make sure that if we think about these triangles lining up, that the letters that are lining up in the names. So if I take that triangle and turn it around, what matches with A?
C.
And with B? And with C? A. Then we need to determine the type of congruence this is. They are not right triangles, so I will need 3 letter names. And what name is that?
Side angle.
Side angle, side. I know 2 sides in the connecting angle. in the past, up till this point, that's been where our proofs have ended. But we weren't asked to prove triangles were congruent today. We were asked to prove that a couple of segments are congruent. Those segments are pieces of these triangles. So as our last step, we can say that those pieces are congruent because they are corresponding parts of congruent triangles.
Is that always going to be it for this lesson?
CPCTC won't necessarily be your very last step, but it will be a part of all of them, and it will happen right after we say we have congruent triangles, but we might have to do one thing beyond that, and we'll see that in our third example. Right, questions? All right, example 2, we'll go ahead and start with our given again. We're given two sets of parallels, which is not anything that we can really mark in our picture. So what we want to do is when I have parallels, I like to draw my little pictures off to the side of my zigzaggies. So AB and BC would be the top and bottom, and if I draw those and the diagonal cutting through, it makes one pair of angles. Which pair of angles does it make? 1 and 4. So I can say angles 1 and 4 are congruent. But I'm also given AD and BC are parallel. So I can draw that zigzaggy as well, which gives me angles 3 and 2. We can do those in the same step because they are the same types of angles. What type of angles are they? AIA. So if parallel, AIA, congruent. Be careful when you're given parallels that you're picking the correct set of angles. In this one, we were given both sets of angles because we were given both sets of parallels. Sometimes you will only be given one set of parallels, so then make sure that you're picking the correct set of angles because it does make a difference. Okay, so from the top and the bottom, I was able to get angles 1 and 4. From the sides, I was able to get angles 2 and 3. All right, so mark that up. I now have 2 things marked in my triangles, but I need 3 things marked before I can say I have congruent triangles. So what else do I know about the triangles?
AC and CA.
AC and CA. Mark that up. And now 3 things are marked in the triangle. So once 3 things are marked, I can say I have congruent triangles. Once again, the names are important, but since this is really the same exact picture as the last problem, I can just use the same exact names that we used last time. And then I need to decide which method this is. So I didn't say anything about right angles, so I'm going to need 3 letters. What letters do I need? ASA. 2 angles and the side that connects those angles. But that's not what we were asked to prove. We were asked to prove that AD and CB are equal, or that's just another way of saying that the 2 segments are congruent. I'm not going to be picky about the difference between when we use equals and when we use congruent. They really mean the same thing. So I can then say that AD is equal to or congruent to CB because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, one of the most common mistakes that students make with this type of problem, though, is just trying to jump straight to saying that those things are equal before establishing that you have congruent triangles. But if you remember what CPCTC means, corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So you better make sure you have congruent triangles if you're going to be saying this. Okay. Questions? All right, third example here. Start out with our given. I can't mark anything for the parallels, but I can mark AD and CB. And for the parallels, I can draw my little zigzaggy. So AD and BC are the sides, and I'll draw on that diagonal. So which set of angles did that make? 2 and 3. So I can say angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. Because if parallel, AIA congruent. I cannot say anything about angles 1 and 4. Because when I drew in my parallel sides, that didn't draw out angles 1 and 4.
Bless you.
2 things are marked in my picture now. I need 3 things marked before I can say I have congruent triangles. So what could my third thing be?
AC is congruent to CA.
C is congruent to CA. Almost always that last piece of the triangle's force is going to come from that reflexive. Not always, but almost always. 3 things are marked, so now we can say we have some congruent triangles. Again, being careful of the names, but we keep on using the same picture, so we'll just keep on using the same names. And picking the appropriate method of the things that we know. We do not know right angles, so we're going to use 3 letters. What 3 letters do I need?
SAS.
SAS, side angle side. 2 sides in the angle that connects them. Then if we look at what we're asked to prove that a couple of sides are parallel. Well, CPCTC is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, not parallel. So we can't just say this and then say CPCTC, because we're not talking about congruent. But we do want to say something is congruent. How do we know that we have parallel lines? What's one of the things that can guarantee us we have parallels? Alternate interior angles can guarantee us we have parallels. So if I can say that I have alternate interior angles that are congruent, then I can say that they must be making parallel lines. So what I want to do then is say angle 1 and angle 4 are congruent, not because they're AIAs, but because they're matching parts in the triangles. And because they're congruent, they must be making some parallel lines. Because if AIAs are congruent, then lines are parallel. So we talked about this back in chapter 3, but if we look at our reasons in step 2 and step 6, they're almost the same thing, but they say it kind of backwards. So remember, the way that we say it, the then, or how we're ending that reason, should be matching what the statement is. So in step 2, we ended by saying AIA congruent. That should be what's on the statement side. In step 6, we ended by saying then parallel. So that's what's on the statement side. Both of them are using AIAs, but the order that we're writing those things is different because of what we're saying on the statement side. Okay? So in all of your problems, your goal is first going to be to get yourself congruent triangles. Then you're going to do a CPCTC with something, and if you're asked to prove something's congruent, then that's going to be it. But if you're asked to prove something else, like parallels, you're going to use those congruent angles to establish parallels. So then we'll go 2 steps beyond our congruent triangles. Okay? Questions? As a gift, we're going to skip our last example and skip question 1 and question 11. So it'll bring your homework problems down to 6, which is what we've been doing nightly up to this point. Now, one thing about this assignment, it can't be late. Tomorrow is the last day of the quarter. So this assignment is due tomorrow and in this quarter, and if it doesn't come in tomorrow, then that's a problem because I need to get everything graded and entered in the grade book over the weekend to have report cards ready next week. So this assignment can't be late. So make sure that this assignment gets done tonight.